Welcome to Thursday Thought. Today I've donned my best tweeds for a bit of woolly thinking. The fleecy friends who produce this wonderful material produce one of the most remarkable products of the natural world. My own relationship with wool is rather complicated. I happen to be allergic to the stuff. It brings me out in a nasty rash. But I also happen to love it. My Scottish roots seem to have embedded a love of tweed deep in my DNA. But when I was growing up, unfortunately, tweed didn't strut the catwalk in the way that it did now. Tweed was just for old men. So at the age of 20, I vowed that when I reached 40, I would be old enough to buy myself a tweed cap. Strangely, 40 doesn't seem quite the threshold of old age that it did then, but fortunately, tweed has come to my rescue through its triumphant re-emergence into the world of high fashion, even if my own particular choice of bonnet still seems a little old-fashioned. But my complicated relationship with wool goes beyond the merely sartorial. My father was a textile engineer, a passionate advocate of the miracle of modern synthetic fibres. So growing up, I was arrayed in polyester shirts, acrylic jumpers, and a pair of nylon trousers which have lived long in the memory as perhaps the most uncomfortable article of clothing I have ever worn. In adult life, my perspective began to change, and my affections turned to natural materials, despite my allergy to wool. Wool is just the best. Turn it into a suit and nothing looks smarter. Turn it into a jumper, nothing's warmer. Wear it out on the catwalk and it's bound to turn eyes. Wear it in the wet and you'll find that it's the only material that keeps you as warm when it's wet as when it's dry. And as the recent Harris Tweed exhibition at Reg Ed showed, it's not only the height of fashion, but it's effectively an art form. Surely wool is what W.B. Yeats might call the heavens embroidered cloth. Yet for some reason, we feel the need to provide for ourselves what nature has already given us so abundantly. Why on earth do we go to the trouble of producing acrylic when we have wool, especially when most of our wool just goes to waste? What is the cost to the planet of distilling its resources into artificial materials that consume an excessive amount of raw material and produce waste that cannot decompose? What is the cost of the planet of ignoring what it already provides so abundantly? And the most remarkable thing of all about wool is that it just grows out of the skin of our little fleecy friends. And that leads me to a rather more fundamental point. Nature is so amazingly generous and clever. It just gives and gives and gives. And not only does it give, but it gives us of the very best quality, everything that we need to flourish on this planet. And I never cease to marvel at that miracle. It seems to me a scandal that the miraculous fleeces from the backs of sheep are sold for less than it costs to produce them, while we spend time creating artificial fibres that do the same job but less effectively. What is it about human beings that disregards the wonderful generosity of creation? We seem to be so anxious about providing for ourselves that we overlook what nature already gives us so generously. And as a result, I think we merely add to our own anxiety and abuse the generosity of creation. Look at the lilies. They don't work or spin cloth, and yet nobody has been more gloriously dressed than they are. So why do you worry about what you will wear or what you will eat? These things will always be provided, the bare necessities from Mother Nature's recipes. At Westmoreland, one of your values is that as farmers you understand your connection to the land. And for me, that must include valuing the generosity of the land, producing miraculous materials like wool. It must include considering the cost to the planet of consuming man-made materials, particularly paying attention to the waste that we produce and how that can be disposed of. And I think it must also include giving back with the sort of generosity the land itself shows. Whether it's wool, or free food from the hedgerows at this time of year, or locally grown produce, or protecting our farmland for food production, there is a crying need for us to rediscover the generosity of nature and stop trying to recreate what nature already does, and in doing so, polluting the world and consuming its resources at an unsustainable rate. Wool, to me, is one of the things that reminds me of the miracle of life on Earth. of the fact that I can abandon anxiety because the planet itself sustains us with reckless generosity. It reminds me of our need to give back because of the symbiotic nature of our relationship with the world. We care for creation and creation cares for us. And it reminds me of my own capacity to be generous. Because the world just goes on giving, then so can I, giving and not counting the cost. And perhaps if we could all live like that, we could be free from anxiety and help the whole of creation to flourish. Thank you.